I'm Kevin Powers. I'm the director of the Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity, Risk, and Governance here at Boston College Law School. Welcome. Before I introduce our dean, Odette Lienau, I just want to address a couple of things that came up over at Barrett House while we were talking. So people are asking about things that were missing from typical BCS, new perks, and then also things that stay the same. So a couple of things that are missing. One, the bagpipers. People seem to be upset about that. Well, there's a reason. It was always great having the bagpipers, but when we hosted the BCCS, it was always in school vacation or in the summer, so no one's around and we could do anything we wanted. School's in session, so that's not the case. Two, what's missing here too is the invocation by Father Don McMillan with the Society of Jesus. Father had to attend to family friends' funeral today, so he could not be here with us. He asked me to do the invocation, so consider yourself blessed right now. So that's missing, and that's really it on the missing front. On the perks, we got great seats here. So those of you who've been to Gaston Hall, if you're in the middle or in the back, you can't see anything. You can't hear anything, but I'm sure you're having a great time in the conference. Here, you're in a classroom, you can see everything, you can hear it, we're all mic'd up, so that's one perk. Parking, free parking. You know how many complaints I used to get? Like, it cost me $30 to park here at BC. I'm like, well, you're welcome. But here, today, hey, free parking, take advantage of it. Another perk is, there's always this request for the brownies, the cookies, and the blondies. Well, we have cupcakes this year, BC cupcakes, so enjoy those. And then finally, things that have stayed the same. One thing that you won't appreciate is that, just like Gaston Hall, good luck finding the restrooms around here. That's just a BC tradition, I don't know why. But then, most importantly, is the conference itself. In collaboration here with the FBI, we have the Assistant Deputy Director, Brett Leatherman, here speaking. We have great panels, and this is a solid conference, and just as good, if not better, so prepare accordingly. And with that, I'm going to introduce our dean, and it's my honor and privilege to do so. This is what happens when you turn 60. Odette Lienau joined Boston College Law School in January 2023 as the inaugural Marion D. Short Esquire Dean, after serving as a professor and associate dean at Cornell Law School. She has strengthened BC Law's mission of providing a stellar legal education grounded in service, including through record faculty hiring and support, programs, quality of life, and facilities improvements, increased international engagement, and expanded placement efforts and alumni involvement. BC Law has climbed 12 spots in 3 years to number 23 in the U.S. News and World Report rankings and achieved record-high graduate employment results. Dean Lienau has overseen the launch of the new Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity, Risk, and Governance. Thank you. And a highly selective Doctor of Juridical Science and the hiring of 15 outstanding new professors. Dean Lienau is a leading expert in international economic law. Her book, Rethinking Sovereign Debt, won an American Society of International Law Book Award, and her research has appeared in top publications like the Harvard International Law Journal and Yale Journal of International Law. She has served as a consultant for the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the United Nations, and is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Prior to academia, she practiced with the Financial Restructuring Group at Sherman and Sterling. She earned her AB and PhD from Harvard University and her JD from NYU School of Law. And it's my honor and privilege to introduce Odette, but also I want to just thank her for all the support, and honestly, getting us over here has been a dream come true, so thank you for everything.
Hello everyone, it's such a pleasure to see you. I know Kevin has been out in the back saying, why don't you all come sit down? I'd like to reiterate that invitation. You are in a law school, but no one is going to be called on, I promise, so feel free to come and sit up front. It's truly a pleasure to welcome you all to Boston College Law School and to the 9th Annual Boston Conference on Cybersecurity. Before introducing our keynote speaker, I would like to thank our partners in academia, private industry, and the government sector for your support of our programs here at BC Law, and especially for our Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity, Risk, and Governance. BC Law, like many of our peers and the university as a whole, conducts cutting-edge research and maintains important information on generations of faculty, students, and alumni. We go to great lengths to maintain the integrity of that data and protecting that information in an environment that also values transparency and open access can be a challenge, especially for those professionals who are tasked with establishing policy and procedures that others must follow. Cybersecurity, unsurprisingly, has become a strategic priority and also a core business function for private industry and government, and there's an increasing need for a holistic approach to the challenges that it poses. But there are few professionals with the technical, analytical, communication, and managerial skills to develop and then implement a unified strategy to address ever-present but also varying cyber threats. At BC Law, our mission is to educate lawyers, and now non-attorney professionals more broadly, who are technically skilled and also deeply committed to service, ethics, and leadership. We believe in the power of law and law-informed processes to advance the greater good, and we challenge our community to be thoughtful stewards of these goals in every sector in which they serve. Our MLS program is a natural extension of that mission, designed for the times we live in, which are defined by rapid technological change, escalating cyber threats, and also a growing demand for professionals who can bridge the gap between law, policy, technology, and operational risk. As they navigate the intricate legal and regulatory landscapes of cybersecurity and their intersection with data privacy and artificial intelligence. So the collaborative approach of this conference, which emphasizes how different sectors must work together to ensure a secure cyber environment, really reflects the hallmark of our program, and I'm really grateful for all of you being here. And today, we're very fortunate to have with us, and it is my honor to introduce Brett Leatherman, Deputy Assistant Director for Cyber Operations at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to share his perspective on this important topic. The FBI is, of course, the lead cyber threat response agency for the U.S. government, and Mr. Leatherman serves as the FBI's senior executive over the operational teams responsible for imposing cost on sophisticated criminal and state-sponsored cyber adversaries, while prioritizing assistance to cyber attack victims. Mr. Leatherman also serves as the director of the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, established in 2008 to coordinate, integrate, and share information to support cyber investigations, supply intelligence analysis for decision makers, and also provide value to ongoing interagency efforts in the fight against cyber threats to our nation. Prior to his current role, Mr. Leatherman served as Section Chief of National Security Cyber Operations for the FBI, where he worked extensively with U.S. intelligence community and with foreign and private sector partners to promote a whole-of-government approach to addressing state-affiliated cyber threats. He previously held several roles in the FBI's Dallas Division, most recently as the Assistant Special Agent in charge for national security, where he managed teams responsible for counterterrorism and counterintelligence and for preventing and investigating weapons of mass destruction and cyber threats throughout North Texas. Prior to his assignments in the Dallas Division, Mr. Leatherman held several leadership roles at FBI Cyber Division, first as a supervisory special agent in a national security threat team, and later as Assistant Section Chief handling operational engagement. Mr. Leatherman entered duty as an FBI Special Agent in 2003, and prior to his first assignment at FBI Cyber Division, he served in the Cleveland and Detroit field offices, while also serving as an FBI pilot and a hostage negotiator. Wow. Mr. Leatherman graduated from Cornerstone University with a degree in computer information systems and received a master's degree in cybersecurity risk management from Georgetown University. He holds a number of widely recognized cyber certifications and speaks internationally on emerging national security and cyber threats. Please join me in welcoming Deputy Assistant Director Leatherman to Boston College Law School.
You guys got the long version of my resume. Next time I'll send the short one, I promise. Good morning, Dean. Thank you. Boston College, thank you guys so much for hosting me here. It is always a privilege to go out and speak to industry on behalf of the FBI cyber teams. But I really appreciate coming to events like this where we have the incredibly strong partnerships that Boston College, the FBI field office here in Boston have generated and maintained over the years. My name's Brett Leatherman. That was actually my old resume. I'm now the Assistant Director for FBI Cyber Division. So Director Patel appointed me earlier this year to lead the cyber teams for the FBI. I could not be happier to be here in Boston with you today. It's an honor to speak in an event with such distinguished history alongside so many professionals and partners that we have across industry, law enforcement, military, and even local high schools. So thanks guys for coming out and participating in the event. For those of you who know me, and there are several of you in this room, it's no secret that I'm very passionate about the FBI cyber mission. I am a 22-year veteran of the FBI. I've had the opportunity to work or manage work in every FBI discipline. Cyber to me has been kind of top of mind, and something that I've really worked hard to stay involved in my 22-year career, because of the impact that it has on our communities and our country. The FBI is unique in that we get to address both criminal actors going after the cyber crime actors, as well as the actors in the national security space. So those nation-state actors looking to hack democracy as we know it often, and really undermining the principles of democracy here in the United States through their cyber operations. Make no mistake, the FBI recognizes the urgency of the cyber threat, which greatly impacts national security in an increasingly digital battle space. Unlike crime problems that we often see that impact single areas of geographic locations or regions here in the United States, cyber threats are border agnostic. They're inherently international threats, and we have to work them just like that. They really defy state and county lines, and they require the authorities of state, local, and international partners to really bring some level of deterrence to the bad actors and provide assistance to victims. Over the past 2 decades, Americans have benefited from this increased and innovative digital landscape, from smart cities to autonomous vehicles to AI-powered breakthroughs, which we seem to see every week at this point, new breakthroughs in artificial intelligence. And while that innovation lifts every sector, our adversaries spend a lot of time reading the release notes on every new innovative and disruptive technology that's released. They're looking at what's new as what is also exploitable. So despite these benefits, these disruptive technologies still pose risk, and sometimes there is a rush to deploy these technologies before we put security considerations in place. Hostile nation states have grown more ambitious in their cyber operations, burrowing deep in our critical infrastructure and private sector networks, seeking not just intelligence, but to pre-place capability and capacity in our networks in the event of some sort of military or kinetic event, specifically in the Indo-Pacific region. Meanwhile, cyber criminals continue to wreak havoc across entire industries, increasingly relying on inexpensive or stolen digital infrastructure to hide their operations. In 2024 alone, Americans reported $1.5 billion in cybercrime losses to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. We know that that figure is only a fraction of the actual number. Those were the crimes that Americans were willing to submit to IC3. What we've learned is that is often a very small amount compared to the actual crime problem we face here in the United States. Thankfully, the FBI cyber teams sit at the intersection of law enforcement, intelligence, and national defense, uniquely positioned to impose costs on our adversaries while providing substantial assistance to the victims of cybercrime. This is a discipline unlike any other in the FBI, in which we can't do it alone, and it requires partnerships at all levels of government and with industry. The work demands urgency, it demands innovation, and close partners across all our organizations in this room. And our charge is not simple in the FBI. It's to make malicious cyber activity unsustainable for the bad actors. That means disrupting them, not necessarily here in the homeland, but abroad wherever we can, fighting the battle on their digital infrastructure as opposed to our digital infrastructure. And really trying to reshape the broader environment through persistent engagement in cyberspace operations. The FBI cyber work is made possible through our unique authorities and our responsibilities in this space. For example, Presidential Policy Directive 41 designates the FBI as the lead agency for cyber threat response for the United States government. That means we integrate our work with the Department of Homeland Security, NSA, CIA, and our other partners in the intelligence community, our domestic law enforcement partners like Secret Service, Homeland Security, investigations, our international partners, all to ensure that victims are prioritized. At the same time, we are pursuing the malicious threat actors themselves. So what does that mean in practice? You can think of the FBI's cyber mission as having four key tenets of our work, or four key pillars. The first pillar is the one you're probably most familiar with the FBI. It's the FBI's job to take players off the battlefield, to identify and arrest them. We've been doing this for over 115 years as a law enforcement agency, and we will continue to do this in all our disciplines, but especially in the cyber fight. This is our rule of law mission set that the FBI has always had, and we will always have, and our agents who support these cases are always wanting to extradite and bring to justice foreign actors who engage in hacking against each of our organizations, our critical infrastructure, and our government agencies. We excel in the FBI at removing the cloak of anonymity many cyber actors hide behind, working with the Department of Justice to indict them, to expose their malicious activity for the world to see. And folks might be surprised at how many we actually get into custody and who actually face justice here in the US. We know it takes time to build a criminal case, and we have lots of subjects hiding under the protection of governments around the world who provide them some sort of safe haven. But our memory is long, and our network of partners is incredibly wide. In just this past month and a half or so, we've arrested 5 of those coming from what many would deem sanctuary countries, in foreign countries as they traveled across the globe, and they are facing extradition to the United States to face that justice. For example, in July, we worked with our Italian partners to arrest a Chinese espionage hacker. He stole research from American universities and compromised thousands of computers worldwide, all under the supervision and direction of the Chinese Communist Party. He sits in Italian jail right now facing extradition to the United States. In September, we joined forces with the United Kingdom's National Crime Agency to arrest a key member of the Scattered Spider Group, which is a cyber criminal group whose attacks have cost victims more than $115 million globally in ransom payments. Also last month, a U.S. resident was arrested by the FBI's Miami team for collaborating with ransomware threat actors to carry out attacks on American companies. Prior to the arrest, the Miami field office worked with Cyber Division's fugitive team to track the subject across 10 countries. If you ever want to see a really exciting team to work for, look at our cyber fugitive team in action, and you will see them track cyber actors across the globe using very unique technologies and authorities. That's an example of their work that has had tremendous results. Something you should each take from each of these examples is that we are targeting the entire spectrum of cyber threats, from cyber criminals seeking to monetize their activity, to nation-state actors seeking to undermine our national security and steal our intellectual property. That includes the supporting infrastructure that these criminals rely on. We use in the FBI a framework called the Key Services Model, which breaks down the ransomware ecosystem into the essential services that these criminal actors use to facilitate or conduct their attacks. Targeting each of those services, digital infrastructure, tools and malware, communication channels, and illicit funds is crucial to the fight against cybercrime. We know that while disrupting any one of these components of the ecosystem has some meaningful impact, the more of those that we take out in any given cyber operation, the more enduring impact we have. And that means denying the bad actors from ill-gotten gains while also supporting victims through disrupting those actors. And when we work in tandem with our partners, from industry to the intelligence community to our international colleagues, we leverage our collective visibility, our collective authorities, in order to target as many of those pillars as we can. The broad focus, I think, relates to the second pillar, which is the FBI's commitment to what we call pressuring the threat. So first is our law enforcement mission. Second is pressuring the threat. Recently, we've revised our cyber strategy. The new focus is on imposing cost, both short-term and long-term, and focusing on imposing cost on the most significant adversaries. It's important to note that we've shifted away from indictments alone. Indictments alone will not carry the day in going after these actors. There are actors that will sit in Russia, China, Iran, or elsewhere that an indictment won't impact them in the ways it does actors sitting in countries that cooperate with U.S. law enforcement. However, we also know that engaging in online enforcement activity to include infrastructure takedowns, virtual currency seizures, as well as covert and other overt lines of effort, we can impose costs in ways that indictments alone may not. It's a change that's paid enormous dividends for us. But the only way it works is by doing very rigorous, detailed investigative work to generate opportunities to pressure threat actors in near real time. Sometimes the FBI's investigative work allows one of our interagent partners to exercise their unique authorities in a very targeted and impactful way, and we're good supporting that. We are all about the best athlete approach. It doesn't matter who gets credit for some sort of cyber operation. If it takes a player off the field or a capability off the field, we're all in on supporting that partner and doing that. We have unique authorities like Rule 41. Those of you in the law school should be very familiar with Rule 41, which is part of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. That enables us to pursue disruption opportunities which are not available to others. Simply stated, Rule 41 allows us to search for and seize evidence that may be located outside a judicial district where a warrant was signed. Increasingly, we are using Rule 41 to disrupt botnets, remove malware, seize cryptocurrency as part of our court-authorized campaign to disrupt the adversary. Right here in Boston, our FBI Boston team leveraged Rule 41 authorities to dismantle a GRU-controlled botnet. This botnet was controlled by Russia's military intelligence agency. Through Operation Dying Ember, the FBI and partners removed those weapons, over 1,000 of them, from the GRU's cyber arsenal. And I'm proud to say that everyone in this room is safer because of that Boston-led operation. This is representative of what we call joint sequenced operations, which means we work jointly with a host of partners to sequence our operations and authorities for maximum impact. In these operations, it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as the job gets done. Another great example was this year's disruption of Luma C2, the most popular info stealer service available on the internet and on criminal marketplaces, which linked millions of infections and millions of dollars in losses to this one platform. An info stealer, for those who don't know, is a special piece of malware that searches through a user's system and steals PII and password. It allows the adversary to get into sensitive bank accounts and other accounts and to steal information that they can monetize. In a novel approach, FBI Cyber and our Dallas field office took steps to disrupt Luma C2 in conjunction with a key industry partner who also had capability to act. Actions included the disruption of their infrastructure, the seizure of their user panel, and the seizure of approximately 2,300 domains all at one time by our private sector partners, plus a joint cybersecurity advisory, which helped us put cyber threat intelligence out there to help industry continue to defend against that threat. Both of these examples represent the power of pressuring the threat. So moving on to the third pillar. Our third pillar is leveraging our domestic authorities to inform the intelligence community's posture and to inform those of you sitting in this room to better defend your networks and your downstream stakeholders. This is extremely important to us. Whether it is before an intrusion or during an intrusion, our critical cyber intelligence gathered through our offensive work is important to your mission, and we take that seriously. Anything we get that we can share publicly or during incident response for us is an opportunity to help you better contain and eradicate the actors from your environment if you suffer a breach. Let me just say, this continues to be a priority area for us. Under my leadership, FBI cyber teams are currently looking at ways to innovate in this space. We recognize that PDFs going out as part of joint cybersecurity advisories are not always the easiest to ingest in your threat environments. So we're looking for machine-to-machine ways to share key intelligence with you, potentially through API access to our environment, so your cyber threat teams can get our threat intelligence on a near real-time basis. And then the fourth pillar of the FBI cyber mission is our commitment to being victim-centered. I like to call it victim-centric. We're very focused on helping you in the event of a cyber breach. The cornerstone of our work for over 115 years has been our commitment to the victims, both through the Victims' Rights Act, as well as our obligation to protect those victims. And it doesn't change in the cyber environment. The cyber environment is a bit unique in that victims are sometimes vilified for a real or perceived lack of cybersecurity hygiene in place, having the right controls in place to protect data or networks. But at the end of the day, who here can compete against the People's Liberation Army in China in their hacking operations? Who here can compete with the Russian GRU or the Russian SVR? It's on all of us to support victims of cybercrime, to help mitigate the harm of that malicious cyber activity and get the help that you need. Our commitment to support victims remains our North Star in Cyber Division. Not only are we bound by the Victims' Rights Act, but you expect it of us when it comes to responding to these incidents. So our service-oriented mission keeps us focused on sharing specific information and tools available to help you mitigate, contain, and hopefully prevent these actors from getting in your environments. Now, I would proffer to you that every joint sequenced operation that you have read about that the FBI has been engaged in against the actors, everything we have done to execute some sort of cost against those actors has been supported in whole or in part, or supported by our private sector and industry partners. I can't think of an operation that I've seen over the last 3 years that didn't have some sort of industry involvement supporting that work. We depend on information sharing with each of you to fulfill our mission and obligations. Earlier this year, the FBI's Boston field office demonstrated what we can accomplish when we are fully engaged with industry. A software and cloud storage company recently was breached, which was utilized by school systems, the largest of its kind in the United States, which affected thousands of school districts. The company received threats that the PII of 60 million students and 10 million teachers was going to be disclosed publicly if they didn't pay a significant ransom, a ransom that ranged in the millions of dollars. We're talking about highly sensitive data on some of the most vulnerable among us, students, to include names, email addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, birth dates, medical information, residential addresses, parent and guardian information, among other things. This PII was transferred from the company's networks to an overseas server leased by the threat actor. Thankfully, this past January, the Boston Cyber Task Force received a message from a private sector partner. The task force responded and was able to determine through its own investigation, as well as with help from our field offices in Seattle and Sacramento, that a person of interest was located right here in Massachusetts. In fact, he was a 19-year-old college student living in a dorm room who apparently thought he had found a way to get rich quick. Thanks to the diligent work of FBI Boston, the FBI uncovered a large quantity of evidence tying Matthew Lane to the crime, including devices, online accounts, crypto wallets, etc. Because of their work, Lane pleaded guilty and just yesterday was sentenced to 4 years in prison in order to pay over $14 million in restitution. While that doesn't undo the harm caused or remove the concerns of parents whose child's information is still out there, the accountability does provide some measure of justice to those victims. And the conviction and sentencing, we hope, shows a deterrence to others who would engage in similar activity, that they're next. As impressive as FBI's Boston's work was on this case, it's one example among many. And this is important. Between 2022 and 2024, the FBI handed out more than 1,200 ransomware decryptors to victims, helping avert an estimated $800 million in ransom payments to criminal enterprises. As the head of Cyber Division, where we are currently undergoing budget cuts, I can only imagine what $800 million would do to our program. I can ask the cyber teams in the back there and they would say the same thing. So depriving the adversary of being able to scale their operations over time to the tune of $800 million and to provide school districts, police agencies, hospitals, and others with decryptors to get their data back, that is compelling work. Our ability to do these things, to impose this level of cost and to support victims hinges on a working pipeline of cyber threat intelligence, often coming from those in this room. I just want to highlight that starting October 1, for those of you in this room who know CISA 2015, it was a law enacted in 2015 that provides liability protection to industry partners in sharing critical cyber intelligence. That law has expired. We're still hopeful that there will be reauthorization when Congress comes back in session. But in the meantime, I want to provide some level of assurance that the FBI is still able to protect any and all information you share with us through our ongoing investigative process, through federal grand jury subpoenas, and other ways we use to protect your data. So in the interim, please don't stop sharing with the FBI Boston team or with the FBI. We can't let this gap in authorization impact what we do. So a few more thoughts on engaging with us. First, it's critical for organizations whose business or functions have a significant impact on our national and economic security to have an existing relationship with the FBI in advance of a breach. We want to avoid introducing ourselves during a crisis. The best time to meet us is before you need us, so we can partner on day one. Second, ensure your organization has an incident response plan and write FBI engagement into that incident response plan. It's equally important that your organization exercises that response plan on a regular and routine basis and engages the FBI as part of that execution or those tabletop exercises. Again, for over 115 years, in the FBI, we have dealt with crisis, and what I will tell you is that during a cyber incident, when you're dealing with crisis, FBI teams can help bring some level of calm to that crisis. Third, in the event you do suffer a cyber intrusion, please report the compromise. Information reported to us not only allows us to search our holdings, to find information and intelligence that we can use to help you in your incident response efforts, it also allows us to go upstream against the bad actors. What we have done is part of Operation Dying Ember, part of the case here in Boston that I just spoke about, part of Luma C2, is if we identify infrastructure outside your networks, outside your environments, we can quickly move upstream against those actors, and it gives us much greater ability to attribute that activity and impose cost, which is incredibly important. Finally, take advantage of the outreach programs that the FBI has to offer. For example, we're very proud of our CISO Academy program, which is an immersive, week-long event that hosts cybersecurity leaders at the FBI's training academy in Quantico, Virginia. Most people who go to Quantico end up graduating as special agents. This is unique in that this is probably the only group of industry professionals who go through a training academy at Quantico and graduate from the program with a certificate outside badge and credentials. There's also opportunities to connect with the team right here in Boston through the InfraGuard program, DSAC, and other outreach programs, and I would encourage you to talk to the FBI Boston teams about those opportunities as well. I want to talk briefly about the PRC threat, since I've got a captive audience here, because that is the threat that we continue to deal with on a regular basis, and that you have heard about probably a lot over the last year and a half in different media reports. The reason for that is we have seen a distinct shift in operational behavior by the People's Republic of China, specifically the Chinese Communist Party. The Salt Typhoon investigation, which I'm sure you've all heard about at this point, is a great example of how industry has led us with containment activity. Last fall, the FBI and CISA attributed a compromise at all major U.S. telecommunications providers to Chinese state-affiliated actors known as Salt Typhoon. These actors recklessly stole information on millions of Americans. They even spied on Americans' telephone calls. They collected their text messages, all in what I would classify as probably the most damaging cyber espionage campaign launched against the United States. Expectation of privacy was violated not just here in the United States alone, but as our teams began to investigate, we identified the targeting of infrastructure in 80 other countries, and we were able to provide notifications to those 80 other countries who were also working to identify and contain impacts related to Salt Typhoon. For their part, timely information shared by the victims themselves have also helped us here in the U.S. to quickly contain that activity and to pursue those actors. Without the support of the telecommunications industry, inviting FBI technical teams in to help them with their incident response, we would not be where we are in containing the actors today. Willingness to share that information in near real time is what made progress possible, protecting not only their networks, but our national securities as well. I'm sure you're all tracking Salt Typhoon, though, is not a one-off. The CCP's cyber operations aren't random. They're methodical, they're deliberate, and they're directly tied to China's long-term national strategy, which is to become not a world superpower, but the world superpower. We've also seen a group known as Volt Typhoon earlier last year, targeting U.S. power grids, telecommunications, and transportation sectors, key components of our critical infrastructure. They worked by exploiting end-of-life devices in small businesses to maintain persistent access and to target U.S.-based critical infrastructure. They use living off-the-land tactics, blending into normal system activity rather than deploying traditional malware. This isn't just espionage, this is preparation. China has borrowed the credibility of our infrastructure domestically to hide in plain sight, embedding wartime capabilities deep into U.S. infrastructure. This ensures that if a military conflict breaks out, especially in the Indo-Pacific, they can flip the switch and potentially turn off the lights and communications within the U.S. military before any shot is even fired. We believe that if China moves on Taiwan, through Volt Typhoon, we could have seen power outages, communication blackouts, and logistical chaos before we even knew we were at war. More specifically, Volt Typhoon was meant to disrupt naval communications in response to some sort of conflict in the Taiwan region. Another group, Flax Typhoon, is focused on long-term espionage, particularly against Taiwan and Indo-Pacific military operations. The CCP Coal through Flax Typhoon isn't or wasn't immediate disruption like it was with Volt Typhoon. It was long-term access and intelligence collection in support of PRC military operations. Last year when we disrupted their infrastructure, they fought back. That was the first time in my history I had seen a state actor, as the head of cyber division for the FBI, actually fight back against us in cyberspace, engaging in what most of us would classify as cyber warfare. They started to fight back by DDoSing FBI infrastructure. As we started to take down their botnet, they were able to reclaim thousands and thousands of their devices back through their cyber operations. We worked through the weekend to continue to pull those back, and when we determined that the fight was going to last weeks, not days, we made the decision to publish a splash page identifying this as an FBI-led, not an industry-led operation. It was at that point that the Flax Typhoon actors not only abandoned their infrastructure, they burned their infrastructure down. They realized they were facing the United States government, and instead of continuing to engage in that activity and fight hand-to-hand with us, they decided to burn it down, which tells us something important. When PRC cyber actors are exposed, they retreat. We force them to adapt. And that also gives victims that period to reconstitute and to build resilience in that they might not otherwise have. We know that the PRC thrives in the shadows. When we shine a light on them, we force them to adapt, rethink, and in some cases, like the case of Flax Typhoon, walk away or burn down their own infrastructure. In the end, China's cyber strategy is not just about intelligence collection, though. It's about reshaping the global balance of power. These operations have real-world consequences for U.S. national security, for our economy, and the stability of our critical infrastructure. The good news is, we're not defenseless. The FBI plays a critical role in countering these threats, but deterrence is not just about offense. Deterrence happens through defense as well, and that's where each of you come in. As an adjunct professor who now sits at the podium of a major cybersecurity conference at an esteemed academic institution like Boston College, I now feel compelled to give each of you some homework. Sorry, guys. So, let me quickly highlight vulnerabilities that I see across FBI cyber deployments that if we all start to close the gaps over the next 30 days in some of these areas, I believe we can meaningfully move the needle on deterring through defense. So where do we start? Look at your perimeter. Look at your perimeter devices now and begin to work in. Do you know what sits on the perimeter of your network? Which devices are approaching end of life? Which have disclosed vulnerabilities with patches available? And how can you move to patch those devices quickly? That is where the PRC is fully targeted. And the idea that I'm too small to be targeted by the PRC no longer stands. The PRC is looking for opportunities to steal U.S. infrastructure and attack U.S. equities using any vulnerabilities available. Next, look at your network administrators and executives in your organization, those with privileged access to your environment. Work to de-escalate that privilege wherever you can. That means not using administrative or privileged rights when they aren't needed. Using separate or sterile devices to do administrative tasks. And frankly, not providing escalated privilege to users when not needed. In everything we do to control risk, remember, what's convenient for us is convenient to the adversary. Third, engage your third parties now to understand what steps they have taken to protect access to your network or access to your data. You can spend millions of dollars on cybersecurity, on cutting-edge technology. For anybody who's been to RSA or any of the major conferences, it's all available to buy. But the adversary will always take the path of least resistance. They will look at your trusted third parties who have access to cut through those protections, and they will target them. So work with them to understand your risk there. And then develop a disruption-ready incident response plan. PRC actors don't just smash and grab, they stay inside networks. They work to persist in those networks, sometimes for years. Always assume breach and hunt across your environments for signs of an intrusion. I would suggest that most organizations are not leveraging artificial intelligence right now across their ecosystem, and because many seem to be waiting for the LLM, which will transform how they defend their entire ecosystem. In aggregate, that's not likely to be here in the near term. Instead, consider looking for small ways you can begin to leverage AI in very responsible and efficient ways. For example, collecting disparate or vendor-specific log files and analyzing those log files for anomalies. And while you're doing that, consider using an inexpensive AI tool to help you understand how to move those log files off device. Because we know the actors, once they get in, will erase log files, which will confound your ability to contain and eradicate them. And of course, I can't say this enough. I've said it many times in this speech already. I'm going to say it one more. Engage with the FBI now before an incident happens. Too often companies wait until they've been compromised to seek help, but building that relationship now with the FBI cyber teams is incredibly important. And I want to say, I met with the Boston cyber teams yesterday. They are some of the most capable agents, intelligence analysts, computer scientists, professional support staff that you will see across the FBI cyber program. For each of the cyber operations that you heard me mention earlier, You can all rest assured they are working with every willing partner right now to remove capacity and capability from adversaries who want to do us harm. I also want to highlight that even on day 15 of a government shutdown, when they and their colleagues around the country face increasing stress outside of work, they remain on the clock, day, night, and weekends, persistently engaging the adversary and helping victims. To those FBI team members in this room and listening online, I want to publicly acknowledge that work to defend the homeland. And to all of you, my charge is this: you are also on the clock. In the last year, the FBI has highlighted just how much the PRC, our most formidable adversary, uses PRC-based companies to support their hacking apparatus. That puts you too on the front lines. While I know we have very good relationships in this room with most of you, starting today, let's recommit to closing the gaps our adversaries consistently rely on. Let's trust more, communicate more, and look for innovative opportunities to empower each other's work to defend our communities and our country. Thank you.
Hey everyone, before I present our token of appreciation, AD Leatherman has agreed to take some questions. So if anyone has any questions for the AD, please go right at it. Questions?
Usually I get a lot of fantasy football questions, but if you have questions about any portion of the speech or the FBI's work, I'm happy to answer those.
Oh, look at that.
Hey, I'm Heather Egan, partner with Cyber Practice in St. Louis, and I just wanted to less a question and more piggyback on what you said, that particularly starting with Director Ray's service and today, the degree to which the Boston office, headquarters, collaborates with victims. As outside counsel, I can say that it used to be that the lawyers would get in the way of that collaboration, but because of the facilitation that we've seen, where both in terms of two-way communication, receiving TTPs back, IOCs, that close sharing, I'm noticing with clients a much faster willingness to pull the trigger on going to law enforcement early, and it just, I think that degree of that cycle of collaboration has made all of our made the practice of collaboration easier for us. I've also seen victim companies be consulted then in the process of charging. So kudos to the team that took down most recently Scattered Spider. That was a few cases that we were dealing with for a few years. And so to actually see the concrete arrest follow on, and the agents that were involved in that staying in close communication with the victim company along the way, as the quid pro quo for having shared information early on. I just wanted to echo, so it's not just you from the agency saying, but someone from industry and private sector saying, we've seen actual results of that collaboration go to not only helping the company's position towards recovery and reporting up to their boards, but also in, I think, making the streets safer, certainly, when members of Scattered Spider are locked up. So thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, thank you. And I'll just repeating for those online, that was an outside counsel who has brought cases to the FBI just saying it's the right thing to do. They've had great experience doing that. And what I would say is we are very focused on engaging inside and outside counsel, recognizing that during a breach, often they want to understand what information will be shared with law enforcement and how it might impact their the company that they represent. And so if you are part of that demographic, if you are inside or outside counsel, we would love to have those conversations with you to help you understand in advance of a breach what information we would be looking at and what information we could share back to help you when it comes to incident response. So thank you.
Question in the back.
Hey, good morning. My name is Jennifer McDonald. I work at Google, and we work with our cyber partners. And you mentioned something very important about like having this incident response plan. In your opinion, how proactive are organizations in actually having a plan that they can act toward, because coming in from my side, it's not quite as prolific as I thought it might be. So just be curious your perspective on it, and if it's not as high as you think, what do you think is the hurdle that's preventing that?
Yeah, the question, thank you, is how many organizations really have incident response plans in place? And, you know, what do we see as far as the number of folks, and then what is the hurdle for that? And so I would say relatively low for the most part. It differs as you get to highly capable organizations like Google, like the Fortune 100s, the Fortune 500s, like they tend to have an incident response plan in place. Two things. Many small and medium and even large businesses do not have an incident response plan in place. Those who do, even often in Fortune 500s, have not updated or tested that plan on a regular basis. I think part of that is not understanding exactly what an incident response plan is for those smaller businesses and what it means to have that in place in advance of an incident. So I think there's an education piece there. But I also think there's a lot driving CISOs and others time that doesn't allow them to revisit incident response plans on a regular basis or test those. In the FBI, you know, if we're doing tactical operations, our SWAT teams, before they hit a house, they will rehearse going through that front door 10 times. And they will evaluate any potential contingencies that might end up getting somebody hurt. And so those 10 times going through different scenarios help build muscle memory so that in the event of crisis, they are quickly able to respond. It also highlights gaps within the plan to go through that door. This is the same thing that cyber defenders should be doing, is creating that plan and then practicing it on a regular basis to understand before the incident happens, what do we have wrong, what can we do better, and what do we have right, and to really affirm that plan. So I think there's an awareness issue. I think there's a value issue, like there's probably folks who may not see value in having an incident response plan until you actually need an incident response plan.
Any other questions? Oh, we have one.
Hey, I'm Riley Ureta. I'm a current student in the BC program, and also I've worked in the venture capital and blockchain space. And I'm curious if you could talk more about the unique technologies you're using to track threat actors across different jurisdictions, and also what authority you're able to operate under to do that.
Yeah, so domestically, we are the lead domestic intelligence community agency, and we collect lawfully domestically primarily two ways. Number one, our law enforcement authorities. So I talked a little bit about Rule 41 for search and seizure. We can issue legal process to get both metadata and content domestically, all overseen by district courts and district judges so that there's judicial oversight when we're looking at that. From outside the United States, we use our intelligence community authorities to collect on infrastructure, as well as our partnerships with intelligence community agencies who can collect and pass us information as well. There is one authority that allows us to collect domestically that is incredibly important to us, and that's known as FISA 702. FISA 702 allows our cyber teams, who are probably 80% of FISA 702 collection in the U.S. is FBI cyber teams. That allows us to be quick and agile in collecting cyber threat actor activity. What that means is we can leverage FISA authorities, not go to a traditional district court judge to get collection authority on U.S. infrastructure that is used by a foreign actor tied to a nation-state terrorist organization who is not located here in the United States, meaning they're not here, there's no chance they're coming here anytime soon, and they're working on behalf of a foreign power. We can now quickly collect on that infrastructure, which allows us to be agile and nimble in pursuing the actors domestically in ways we can't always do it with traditional criminal legal process. So those are kind of the two ways that we kind of bucket it in domestic authorities versus international authorities. And you've heard probably 12333, Executive Order 12333 mentioned. Can't get into the details of that, but the FBI publicly is known as one of the intelligence community members that have authorities under that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Sigmund. I am a partner at Hinckley Allen, and I co-chair our cybersecurity, privacy, practice group as well as our artificial intelligence practice group, and I chair our national security and international trade practice group. And I have the privilege of moderating this wonderful panel. I will say that I had 22 years as a former federal prosecutor, so I always enjoyed these conferences and hearing the individuals that Kevin Powers has assembled and this being the 9th annual conference. I also have the pleasure of teaching for the cybersecurity program in national security law class, and I have a few students that are here. So welcome everyone. I'd like first, so again, I'm very privileged to have this great panel that we're going to be speaking on a very important subject of partnerships and the public-private partnerships and playbooks. And you've heard all day, beginning with the assistant director, about the importance of preparedness, to have an incident response plan, not to have an incident and then have to figure out how to respond to it. So we're going to continue that theme this morning until this afternoon. And don't worry, you have free lunch coming up. But I'd like each of the panelists to please introduce themselves, starting with Brian.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Smith, and I am a Senior Vice President at FINRA, which, for those of you who are not familiar with FINRA, it is a self-regulatory organization over broker-dealers. So if you want to sell securities in the United States, you have to be a member of FINRA. And in that role, I oversee our cyber, crypto, and financial crimes investigations. Prior to that, I served for 21 years at the FBI. Working across those three areas. In my last job, I worked with Brett when he was running the Russian section. I ran cyber criminal operations.
Hi, I'm Cindy Bassford. I'm a partner at Guidehouse, and I lead our cybersecurity practice. For those of you that don't know Guidehouse, we are a consulting firm globally. We have about 18,000 employees. We focus on a broad range of industries, from financial services, healthcare, energy, the federal government. And my career has been about 26 years helping clients and corporations, individuals and public, understand their cybersecurity portfolio. I was joking earlier that in that time I went from, do you have a character password, that you just didn't want it blank, you just didn't want it to be a default. And now today, 15 characters, looking at facial recognition, really pushing the boundaries of what are non-human IDs and how we secure that. So it's been a very interesting career throughout those journeys, working again with many different industries throughout that time.
Morning, everyone. Doug Dolman. I'm with the FBI here in Boston at the Boston field office. I supervise one of the two cyber squads, the criminal cyber squad, and my colleague Bobby Plum in the back is our supervisor of the national security squad. I just want to say thanks so much to this community here at BC. I feel like this has evolved and been such a great place for me to learn, continue to grow, and help defend the networks and the people and Americans out there. So thank you for that. I've been in the Bureau for 23 years as an FBI agent. Started here in Boston, returned back here to Boston in 2016 to work Cybercrime Matters. And I'll say and start with what I often talk about is that nothing I speak about today is really done in a vacuum or by Doug Dome. And I'm privileged to stand in the front of a lot of work being done by not just FBI agents and analysts, but our colleagues at the state police. I know Ed Keefe is here. Secret Service is represented in various roles throughout federal, local law enforcement. So thank you for that, and look forward to hearing and speaking with our other guests.
Hi, my name is Mark Sutton. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Bain Capital. For those of you who don't know what Bain Capital is, we are an alternative asset management firm, probably best known for private equity. Headquartered in Boston, we have $220 billion in assets under management that we look to try to secure and protect. So yeah, looking forward to this panel.
So unfortunately, you probably noticed we're missing somebody. So Seth Costo, who is a friend of mine, he's at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Unfortunately, due to the shutdown, He is the chief of the financial fraud, cyber and chief of the securities fraud, financial fraud, and cyber unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Was not allowed to participate because only essential activities are allowed right now. But because I was the chief of the National Security Unit, I'll try. If there's a question about a prosecution issue, and Doug is a phenomenal agent, and he's been such a great asset to the FBI, and even now in prior practice, I call on him quite often for clients, and I know he will be able to answer those questions as well. Sorry, Doug, you don't put you on the spot.
I'll do my best.
So the first question I was going to pose to the panel, and it's going to go to Doug, is the current threat landscape. We heard today from the Assistant Director, Brett Leatherman, and I will say that over the years, the FBI has shared far more information than I have seen. Over the 20-some-odd years or 25 years that I've worked now in national security, do you guys remember, classified information wasn't shared. Information wasn't declassified. It wasn't shared with the private sector at all. And what is really refreshing and shows the commitment, I think, to the FBI, who's co-sponsoring this panel, this conference, is the amount of information that the Assistant Director shared today. I thought was really striking in comparison to years ago, where that type of information was not shared with the private sector. It really does show the commitment of working together, that the importance of that partnership. And so, but I will say, private companies really are being bombarded with constant threat information. Daily information about hacking campaigns of the PRC, of Russia, the GRU, and also the acceleration of ransomware and extortion campaigns using AI. So, Doug, can you provide to boil it down for us? We've heard the overall threat landscape picture from your Assistant Director, but can you tell companies and individuals represented in the audience and individuals in the public sector as well, what do you see from the Boston division, and what steps do you think are the most important for these companies to be taking right
Sure,
now?
I'll kick this off, and please, the other panelists, please can help me contribute to the threat landscape, because it's going to look different for everyone out here, depending on where you're working and what you're protecting. At the end of the day, for us at the FBI, and I mentioned Bobby Plum, the two of us are speaking to victims on a daily basis. A lot of the financial loss from a criminal standpoint is how impact is determined for the courts and for our resourcing our casework. So BEC, business email compromise, continues to be the most efficient way that criminals are able to monetize their criminal activity. Social engineering continues to win the day. I know that AI is on top of mind for many of us, but securing our mailboxes continues to be something we've been trying to do for over 20 years. So I don't want to fall short by not mentioning that. But the threat landscape from a criminal standpoint is, our ransomware is our bread and butter. We talk to ransomware victims daily. I find that less and less it's about encrypting the file system is less of a concern. It's more about having access to that data, and the fact that the criminal actors have exfiltrated that data and now have access and can threaten to release it, use it for themselves, target those customers of the data that they've stolen. And that extortion attempt is really what victims are trying to work themselves through as far as solving what that's going to look like. It may not be just easy as let's get our network back up and running. It may be how are we going to continue to mitigate this threat and this issue for the coming years while these threat actors have access to our information. So understanding what you can do to protect yourselves against that threat is extremely important. And then the hybrid threat, where we have the previous panel discussing the physical security and the blending of that network security. It happens in law enforcement too, where we see that criminal threat, that extortion attempt, or the ransomware event be layered on now by phone calls and conversations with executive leadership or assistants in executive leadership to encourage them to pay that extortion. In the criminal world, that's where we're seeing that those are things that are starting to concern me that we don't have an immediate solution for. When I look at the other side of the FBI's threats being nation states, the big four continue to be a concern. China being number one, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Mark, can I turn to you next and to talk about the financial, the financial picture you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Doug mentioned, there are certainly different threat groups who are motivated by different things. The major concern for us being, a financial institution and also having investments in a number of different companies is, we are most concerned by the financially motivated, somewhat opportunistic cybercriminals. Okay, and the way that they are going about their operations is essentially using AI now, because that is making them so much faster, and the attacks that we're having to face and defend against so much more voluminous with what we're having to do. So it hasn't changed the game, right? There's still a door and a window that they need to get into to try to get into our environment from an unauthorized access perspective, right? But the numbers of doors and windows that they can find are increasing, and the amount of attacks and the amount of attempts that they take to try to get in is just exponential now, because you're just against bots. And then once they're in, that's when they go hands on the keyboard. That's when the people take over, right? So they use AI to be able to get in, and then people take over and then essentially extort you. And as Doug said, rightly so, encryption today is not really used anymore, right? They're not encrypting systems because encryption is hard. I don't know how many people have tried to write an encryption algorithm recently, but it's difficult. But we can all download data. That's pretty easy. Right? So they download, exfiltrate the data, and then they extort you based on that. And then what happens is, unfortunately, based on the litigious society that we live in here in the United States, it turns into a real business risk issue and a legal issue. Right? The cyber aspect of it is kind of done. You put a bow on it and move on, and you're operational again. But now you have the follow-on impact of risk, fines, class action lawsuits from the individuals who've been impacted by the data that's been lost based on what the business is. So that's what we're seeing.
And I think there's a couple of things that you mentioned there which amplifies the crossover that we see within the threat. So it's not just thinking about this as a cyber issue. So even though we're talking about a cyber conference here, it really spans broader than that. It's a cyber and financial crimes issue. And I think that's one of the things that, when I was at the Bureau and then now at FINRA, we're trying to get potential victims and firms to think about what's the business reason for this. And if you look at the latest IC3 annual report, I think it was $16 billion in potential losses out there. And then if you start to break that down, and that's an increase. I think the year before was 12, it was 8 the year before. So if any of our portfolios did that, we'd be really happy. But we're talking about fraud. And so that's bad news for all of us. And if you break down that 16 billion, about 12 billion of that is what I would call cyber-enabled fraud. So that's ransomware, that's BEC, that's crypto competence schemes, aka people trading. All of those things which is taking money out of firms from the FINRA perspective, individual investors, which is our parents, it's us, and it's the BEC, and that's going into the criminal's hands. And so we can't just think about this as a technical problem, because that's not how they're thinking about it. They're thinking about a business problem. And then to Doug's point on kind of the social engineering is that, we got to think about this, it's not just a technical solution. It's, what are they trying to do and understanding that. And I used to do consulting, and the thing that Deloitte and Anderson pushed into us was people, process, and technology. And sometimes it's that you have good processes in place, so that then when that phone call comes in to somebody on the support line, they're not giving away their password. They're not giving them the keys to the kingdom, which then they're using to extort and do a ransomware attack like we saw with Standard Spider.
And what you were speaking about is all financial, mostly financial information, but ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about when they get in your network, they're getting your IP, they're getting your intellectual property as well. They might be getting data from that government shared with you if you're a government contractor that could be export controlled. You know, all of those things, you know, could be, you know, create some huge compromises and vulnerabilities for not just your company, but other companies. And we are going to talk about in a minute third-party risk. But I want to turn the question to Brian. What we've seen over the last 5 years is really a change in tactics. And what I'm talking about is law enforcement tactics, which does increase the need for partnerships. And that's since the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in 2021, Department of Justice and the FBI's strategy was not just, I think the Assistant Director said, Leatherman said, you know, indictments. You know, they did indictments. Now there has been a change in more disruption campaigns that are span numerous foreign countries that are working with the U.S. law enforcement, seizures of domains, seizures of virtual assets, And Brian, you were at the FBI at the time when this a change in strategy occurred. Can you, you know, describe to us the strategic changes that were made and how the U.S. government's all-tools approach has been rolled out, and what effect it has on private industry?
Yeah, when you mentioned Colonial, I kind of shuddered a little bit. That was my first week on the job. Was running cyber criminal operations, which ransom was my problem. And then a month later, we had Kaseya. And so there's a lot of good fundamentals that have been put in place about how do we do this better with the all-tools approach that you talked about and whole of government. And what we did at the time, and I think this is important to understand because it reflects why you see some things that are happening today, why events like this are so important, is that we kind of turned the problem on its head. Instead of looking at it like, okay, we've got an individual investigation, we're going to target them, and we're going to go all in on it. And I will tell you, FBI, Secret Service, really good at doing that, and they've done it for years. But the speed of that, it's too slow. And so we turned the problem on its head and said, wait a minute, you know, let's look at this from the threat actor perspective. What is it that they need to do in this space? And you heard Brett talk about it this morning of the key services. And we broke it down in those 4 areas. And I'm going to go through those because I think it's important for you to understand, because I think it's important to understand what law enforcement needs, as well as then how you should be thinking about the problem in your network. And those key services are malware and some sort of delivery system by which you're going to get that on the network. Some sort of infrastructure by which they're going to launch the attacks. So these can be VPN services. These can be bulletproof hosters. These are also then, if you think about it, internally for the adversary of, I just infected someone with ransomware, I've got affiliates who are managing this, I need some way of tracking this. I'm a former accountant, so I love this part of this, is that they have to account for what they're doing because there's no honor among thieves. I infected you, am I going to tell my boss that, you know, the ransomware is 10 million, or am I going to tell him it's 20 million? Well, if boss isn't tracking that, he doesn't know. So they've got to have good accounting in there. So there's a control panel that everyone can see, which provides some opportunities for Doug and his team to exploit. And then you need some sort of communications platform. So some mechanism by which you're going to recruit, identify victims, and then communicate with those. And then the last part, which is the reason they do this, is the financial piece. I'm trying to extract money out of you. And so if you look at all those 4 areas, you'd be hard-pressed to find one person who can do all of those things. And so they are finding specialized groups and individuals who attack each of those. And then that was the playbook then that the FBI and then now the U.S. government has put in place to not only attack criminal but also national security actors of, okay, if they're using those 4 things, how do we degrade each of those? How do we take action against each of those? And it may not be that knockout punch that you want by having somebody in custody, But if you can increase the costs of them for their infrastructure, if you can take the money out of their pockets on the encryption, so they're giving out decryptors in this, or you can seize assets on the back end of it, it then makes it so that it doesn't make sense for them to do this. And so the same things they've been doing on you of putting pressure on you every day in those areas, that's what that policy was. And there's a recognition that that's not just government. That means the private sector is in that space. The private sector has insight and knowledge and expertise, particularly in real time, that the government doesn't have. And so it's essential that you have relationships to help facilitate actions against these sort of things.
Thank you. Cindy, I'm going to turn to you for the next question. Over the last couple of years, there has been numerous reports. We all know this. AI. Everyone's trying to deploy AI as fast as they can in their networks. Likely not incorporating enough cybersecurity. Let's be honest. But also that AI has supercharged cybercrime. And AI allows them to scan networks, to identify and weaponize vulnerabilities quickly, develop malware. And so how can companies use AI defensively to help prevent attacks? And if you could, just talk about in your work, how what you can tell them about, some steps to protect themselves.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, AI is here. I think a lot of cybersecurity professionals, the last sort of disruption of cloud, we sort of fought against it. We were really slow to adopt it. We were saying, wait. I'm on the flip side really with AI right now, in that I've seen a lot of success working side by side on some of my clients with AI SOCs and AI SOC agents, right? And how that's really helping us. They're making it different. As we heard, these attacks are coming so fast and furious that we need these bots to also help us defend ourselves. And so, working with these tools and LLMs to ingest those PDFs that we were talking about this morning that are coming from CISA or from the FBI that's really talking about the attacks. And it would take a human, it takes them a half day to really understand what's going on and think about looking at which logs. It's also incredibly expensive with many of those level 1 analysts sitting there in these security operations centers to pound basically on your SIM tools, and with doing so that's also very expensive because those analysts get very excited and try multiple queries. What the tools that I'm seeing, the LLMs, the Gen AI, is really taking, ingesting that quickly, going back and looking through the logs, and then what's been beautiful too is the audit trail that comes out. What it spits out within seconds really are tickets that can be worked, that have no typos in them, so that the level 2, level 3 human analysts that are going in and further trying to understand what's happening, is this a real attack, where are we going, they're not wasting their time because somebody plugged the wrong server in and they're looking in the wrong spot. They are more accurate. And they're helping us be more effective. I've seen the cost go down, as I mentioned, from really bringing the cost down of querying those logs, but we are not getting rid of any of the people in these SOCs. You're just making them much, much more efficient and effective, and that's a really interesting use case for AI. Another one that we're doing too, and there are companies out there that are also really marketing a lot, but I've seen them be very effective, is using AI to find those vulnerabilities and then to automatically patch, right, what's happening. That's taking time away from our administrators and really allowing those tools. There are faults, and we need to secure these systems by all means. We talked a little bit about incident response earlier this morning, and one of the things that is heartbreaking to me when I've been in the situation rooms of deciding ransomware, do you pay, how do you get your operations back up? It's really the people don't know how to go back. Like, they can't do the business without the data. It's not, do they need that data? They don't know how to go back to move forward in their business. And I challenge people a lot. There's, NIST is publishing wonderful things on how to secure AI, but also thinking now through that, if you don't have access to that bot anymore, who knows what they were doing, and can you do that business when they're down? And that's something that I think we all really need to be thinking about when we're thinking about recovery. And that's a piece that I'm talking to a lot of customers about, how to get through that phase and thinking through securing that.
So you're referring to that business operation, so you're down, and hospitals especially, you hear all these stories like they have to go back to paper and pen, and how do they do that? And having, obviously there was discussion earlier, I think throughout the day, about preparedness and having tabletop exercises and understanding, what you're using your data and where your data is stored is so critical, to Cindy's point. So along that same line, so the next question is, and I'm going to start with Mark, but it's open to everybody, is cyber hygiene and incident response strategies. It seems like every October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, everybody comes out and says, okay, everybody use MFA now, strong passwords, and obviously we all know that 99% of the cyber attacks are a result of what? Human error. We talked about the phone calls, the help desk, giving away passwords. And it's not, if your company is going to be attacked, but when, and so how do you limit the scope of that cyber intrusions in your network? So, Mark, what are, and this is going to be open to everybody, so what are the biggest mistakes you see companies making? And in your experience, what is the most important advice you would give to private companies and the public sector to improve their cyber hygiene and resiliency?
Yeah, good question. For me, it's basics. We talked about AI, we talked about cloud and SaaS and all of this cool new stuff. But as Stephanie just said, it is 100% a people problem. Right? I work at Bain Capital, and there's a lot of capital around at Bain, and we can deploy that and buy all the best tools and all the best bells and whistles. But at the end of the day, I can't spend enough money to make the cyber problem go away. It's all around people, and it's around process. And I think a lot of the organizations who are compromised today, if you actually took the technical ramifications of the incident away, and you put it into a physical term and said, well, are you surprised it happened? So you left your front door open with a big sign saying, loot in here. And then somebody walked in, picked it up and walked out, and you were none the wiser. Are you honestly that surprised? And that's essentially what's happening today. Companies aren't getting hacked. There's no hacking that's happening. People are just logging in. People are hacking themselves, essentially. And what we have in the media is this defensive mechanism saying, oh, it was sophisticated. It was a sophisticated attack by a nation-state actor, right? And there's a smoke and mirrors there that people kind of hide behind. But at the end of the day, if we did a basics right, blocking and tackling, knowing what assets are in our environment, making sure that we have a complete coverage of controls, making sure that we weren't relying on username and password as credentials to get in, and we have multi-factor authentication. I'm not talking about like autonomous agentic AI whiz-bang tomfoolery. This is just basic blocking and tackling. And people just forget that we need to go back to basics. And we would prevent a whole, I don't want to throw a statistic out there, but a lot of incidents would go away if we just got the basics right. Sorry, that was a mic drop, wasn't it? I'm sorry.
The tomfoolery was.
Tomfoolery, it's fine. Yeah.
I can't agree more. A lot of what we do have the sophistication there are those APT threats out there. I think when I speak to victims, they're hoping that that's what I come back with, is that we think this might be an APT. It usually is not, and one of the important things to know is that we, at the FBI, we don't care. In law enforcement, we don't care. We just want to help recover and defend what we can. So that is where you can, we are encouraging you to be forthright and honest with us on how that attack came in, because that means it's just going to be cutting through the noise. We just want to get to the threat actor and be able to work our case, as I say, from the edge of your network out into the rest of the world. That's where our authorities are most useful to us. So we don't need to understand the back story and the ins of your security posture, but we do want to know what the impact was, and we will want to know what that initial attack vector was, and then we can go off and running.
Can I add to that? I think there's another challenge here, and it comes down to cyber insurance. Because people have completed their cyber insurance application, right? And it may not have been the CISO, it may have been the CFO, may have been somebody else. And they're going through it and they're like, oh yeah, we've got multi-factor, yeah, we do this, yeah, we do this, we do this, right? And then the attack happens and they realize that they got in through a method that they weren't covered. And now, if they don't maintain that posture of saying, oh yeah, it was a sophisticated actor, the insurance policy isn't going to pay out. Because who wants to go back and say, oh yeah, maybe we didn't have multi-factor, or maybe we weren't doing the basic things that I attested to on our cyber insurance application, because then that gets very sticky. So there's other wrinkles that people are hiding behind here from a lot of this cybercrime stuff when it comes back to the insurance coverage.
But I think another thing that they're hiding behind is that too often, to the earlier comments, we treat this as a technical problem. They say, well, that's for those nerds in IT to figure out. That's not my responsibility as a business owner or as an operator in the business line. And the reality is that it is, because it's not the IT department that's clicking on the links. It's Joe in finance. It's Francine in marketing. That's who you got to worry about. And so one of the things, one of the mistakes that I have seen people make a lot, very often, is not understanding their crown jewels. So I think AD talked about it this morning. You need to understand what crown jewels are on your network, and you need to understand that between each department. It's not just the crown jewels for the company writ large, but what's important to finance, what's important to marketing, what's important to research may be very different. And I remember going to a chemical company where I asked the IT people, what are your crown jewels? What do you protect this? Oh, it's the chemical compounds that we use, and so those are down lock and key. Nobody can get in those except for like 3 people. Sounds great. You talk to the chemists, and they said, any first-year chemical student knows those compounds. Our competitive advantage is our process and our proprietary software that we've developed for the refinement of that. And, well, okay, so what are you locking down? The wrong thing. And I see that at the Bureau, and I see it even now at FINRA, is that we repeatedly see people locking down the wrong things. So this isn't technical. This is just understanding what's important to you and making sure that that is protected more than the things that don't. You want a day when you say, if someone steals that, I don't care, then don't protect it.
And that's so important, Brian, that brought up 2 points. First, that it isn't just the IT problem. I think we all have come to that conclusion, right, in this room, and that's why we're all here, that it's for the entire company is responsible to protect that network, going down to the lowest level employee, because if they get into somebody's account, they might get into other aspects of the account, of the network. And then access controls. The importance of, I had years ago, and this before the cyber threat was as bad as it is today, I remember I had an individual from Teradyne who was speaking at a conference, a government conference that I was organizing, and he was speaking about how they segregated their trade secrets so that only one person could access this, one person, only a few people here, and that was the zero trust, least privilege model that everybody should be really incorporating. I want to move to the importance of partnerships, because that was the title of our panel. And Doug, based upon this alarming cyber threat picture and the growing likelihood of us potential conflicts. We hear every day about it seems like maybe it came down a little, the temperatures between China and the United States, but it's been on a pretty uptick, a huge uptick, in Iran, et cetera. Can you talk to the audience about how important, the importance of the partnerships between the FBI and the private sector, and describe how best these partnerships work from your experience, and maybe give us some case examples of how those collaborations, ended up resulting in some criminal prosecutions or some, takedowns.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, so I think you heard it from our previous panel too, that the individuals, the CISOs from these sports franchises, they're collaborating with other sports teams. That's essentially what we're encouraging not only you to do with law enforcement, but with your peers, and that's why this BC conference is such a great platform to continue to grow in the space. We can't do this alone. The FBI can't arrest every threat actor and make the problem go away. It's going to take network defenders in all industries to help mitigate and block what we can. And understanding how to do that, we don't have to recreate the wheel every single time, but we can learn from each other along the way. I'll just speak on a situation yesterday that we had a case result in a conviction after sentencing of Matthew Lane. A.D. Leatherman mentioned it. The subject got 48 months in prison and a $14 million restitution that was ordered by the judge. We would not have been able to be successful in that case had it not been for private sector partnerships that were built before an incident even occurred. In fact, years ago, that we had developed. We had trust built between us. There was phone conversations. We were able to work through a holiday when an incident was going on. And again, because of that trust was there, because the relationships were put in place, it was a uncomfortable situation for everyone up front, all the victims up front. We worked through that, and realizing there was not a short-term solution, we continue to just engage, have a back and forth dialogue with those victims until we were able to provide some results, and fortunately, and in short time, get a conviction and a result after that case was worked. I will also say that as far as partnerships go, you heard me mention it before with our state and local federal our task force. Our task force in Boston and across the country in every FBI field office works from with our intel communities to the federal partners and our local and state partners. So those relationships are important in the private sector as well as in law enforcement as well. Bring into the CISA as a great partner of ours here in New England. We used to sponsor a private sector membership in our task force. Some of the members are here in the audience, but no longer can we get to that extent. But as far as what that looks like, we want to have that dialogue, and we need to have a level of trust to understand what data and I'll say telemetry you have access to that we can use to enrich some of our known threat actors. And we're willing to do that on a one-on-one basis with some of your analysts or investigators. If there are things that are suspicious activity that you would like to bring to us, we can have a two-way dialogue instead of just an intake of that information at the FBI. But we need to build that, and it takes time to do so.
Can I just add to that? Sorry. Listen, I think when you are the FBI or your CISA or you're these big organizations, partnerships is the right word. But I think for all of the defenders and all of us who are defenders in this room, it's less about partnership and it's more about relationship. Okay, so I know that I walk in here today and you're seeing friendly faces that I know and trust. And they're people that I know. If something's going wrong in my environment, I can pick up the phone and call them directly and get help. I mean, hey, I need help here, we've got a situation, can you help me? Right? I know that I can reach out to others as well and do that. And that is what I think is most important and essential for us to be successful in defending against adversary. I really do. And yes, the partnership will happen and those will work itself out, but it's relationships among peers and relationships among other practitioners that's going to allow us to be successful. So if there's one thing that you do today, go and find somebody, strengthen a relationship, go and find somebody in this room, build a relationship with them, because that's what's going to make you successful down the line.
And Cindy, I'm just going to ask you a question, right? Along the same line. Okay. So there are clients, for the lawyers in the room, and your bosses, who say, I don't want to talk to the FBI, and we want to keep this all in-house. I don't want anyone to know. We'll decide what we're going to do. And even lawyers will say, well, it would be a good idea to report. You might be legally required to report if you're a government contractor, or depending on what your industry is. There's all different industry requirements. So, Cindy, how do you navigate that issue with your, when you're consulting with clients? And if you can also speak about like preparedness and maybe incident response plans and tabletop exercises along those lines.
Yeah, all great topics
Yeah.
for today. But just on Mark's point and Doug's point as well. First, like in the last 6 or 7 years, just the collaboration, I think, from really seeing the federal and the state reaching out across industries with the FBI, with CISA, with the critical infrastructure, encouraging those relationships have been great. I mean, there was a breach up in New Hampshire at an oncology center that I worked with them on, and when they finally made the decision to call the FBI, it was like there was this moment of calm in the command center, and especially when they showed up. It was just an incredible partnership, but that was so scary, and that leads to this answer. It's a very emotional thing when you're being attacked and when you're having to do it, and you're worried about opening up, not only your crown jewels, which are probably already stolen, but really your reputation. And that's what a lot of people are thinking about when they're trying to make this decision of who do they report to, how do they report, what do they report, because it could have been my fault. It might put me in breach of my cyber insurance, right? And so really, I think it was talked about earlier by Michael, that getting the executives involved, identifying one person to make the decision of, are you going to report or not? Who are you going to bring this in? Because it matters. You need legal counsel on that consult, because as Stephanie's mentioning, and we all know there are some laws that are lapsing and hopefully will come back into place for protection. But there's different legal issues, so you need to consult your legal counsel. You do, at some level, need to understand what happened, because you need to know if your insurance, if your internal processes are broken. And then also, you need marketing in there, because you're going to have to tell your third-party partnerships, and then you're going to lose trust in your reputation in the industry. And so all those things are really need to be considered, and that should be part of your incident response planning, preparedness, that you have an executive that knows that's going to be their job, because things are going to be going crazy, and people need to know what is their responsibility, and that's really important.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to add, I don't think you can overemphasize having that incident response plan. We had the sports panel up earlier, and you think about athletes, they always talk about when the game slowed down for them. When you have an incident response plan, that slows the game down. If you think about these incidents, they're probably the most high-pressure situation. If it's ransomware, the adversary knows how to put pressure on you to try and make you make a decision in the heat of the moment. When you've already practiced that, when you planned it, you understand here's what our policy is going to be, whether we pay or not pay. You've actually worked with the business lines. So one of the mistakes we see within incident response plans is they don't factor in, and table talks, is they don't factor in the business people. It's just the IT folks that are doing it. Again, you're not going to go through that all by yourself in the incident. You're going to need the communications people. Who's going to talk to the media? Who's going to be engaging with the FBI or law enforcement? Who has that person at law enforcement? Walking through those ahead of time slows that game down, and then you're making conscious decisions Instead of, for those of us with kids, it's like dealing with a teenager. They're just going to put pressure on you and maybe you can make a decision then. Don't let them do that. Take your time and have a plan.
And where is your plan? Everything? Is it on the network? Because that's all one. We're not going to get that. And I give that as an example because that's happened with clients. And so I'm like, where's the cyber insurance plan? Or a policy? Where is this? It's all on the network. So having what we called in the government a crash pack, and that's your incident response plan, a hard copy. I know to say such a thing, print out a copy, it might be foreign to folks. The other piece I just want to mention before moving on to the next question is the assistance the FBI can provide is you're dealing with a ransomware group that you might not have, and maybe you have never heard of. You don't have any idea what you're dealing with, and you want to gather intelligence. You want to buy time. Well, how do you do that? Well, the FBI will give you they might be able to give you some information about this threat actor that you don't know anything about. And so those are the types of things that sometimes, trying to get people to report. This is the value of reporting. That other victims, this could help other victims. Maybe the FBI is already investigating this group, and there's some operation going on. Those are all things that I think, in the background might be occurring. I did mention, and we still have time, so we're going to do 2 more questions. Third-party risk and the supply chain, I think is extraordinarily important. We've seen how these supply chain attacks have devastated Change Healthcare, CDK software, and now we're talking about Salesforce, the platform that has gotten compromised. Brian, can you discuss how companies can protect themselves from third-party risks and their supply chain?
Yeah. So this is a trend that I saw as I was leading the FBI in the summer of 2023. We saw a shift of, instead of going after individual entities, they saw what they were able to do with Change Healthcare, with Kaseya. If I had one entity, I get a much higher yield out of this because now I've got 80 entities that are focused on them, trying to get them to make a payment. So the adversaries shifted their tactics to the area. Within financial services is the industry that's most reliant upon third parties. And so, as a regulator in that space, we are spending a lot of time looking at that. And what I'd say is that as we've kind of gone through, one is understanding who your vendors are. We went out and asked our firms, give us all your vendors. We probably got 60% of what they actually had out there. We then found additional ones. And then what we've been then doing is going, and we are actively looking for vulnerabilities and targeting of those third parties. And when we see that, we notify the vendors. So what's the lesson for all of you who are not, if you're a broker-dealer, you're going to get that from us. But if you're not a broker-dealer, is one, understand to the point of understanding your network, understand your vendors. So that if this entity gets hit, it's going to have an impact on you. And have that as part of your plan. When you're signing up your vendors, make sure that there's something in that contract that talks about what's going to happen when there's an incident. If they have a breach, if they have a vulnerability, what's their legal obligation to you? A lot of these contracts were written where that wasn't factored in, and so they don't necessarily have to tell you. And I've seen that with third parties, is they're going to hit their biggest customers, but they may not let you know if you're a smaller one. So get that in writing, and then as we move forward, it's going to go down the chain. You have to look at the fourth party and who they're using for this. And understanding with the third party of how critical are they to your operations. Is that if they go down, are you no longer able to operate? Well, then you need to think about them a little bit differently and make sure that they're part of, or you've got a redundancy in there so you have resilience if there's an attack on them.
And so I was going to ask everybody to do final thoughts, but just one last piece on what Brian said. This third parties now include AI vendors. So just that raises a whole new level of risk and vetting that your company should be doing to ensure that your data is secure and what you're sharing with that AI vendor. So final thoughts. I'm going to start with Cindy, and can you tell us, your concerns and what's in the horizon that you're worried about, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, we talked a lot about different technologies, and really what I'm thinking about now is, maybe 2030, maybe 2027, who knows, but quantum computing, right? The day that machines are fast enough to break most of the encryption that we have today. And working in the federal space, as I'm sure many of my panelists understand, there is a thought right now that we're going through a process of harvest now, decrypt later, where adversaries are just trying to steal as much data and not even telling you. They're doing it very quietly because they're waiting for the day when they can break your encryption. And to the point of, controlling, the crown jewels, or I think containing the blast radius, right? Like, you really need to be understanding and mapping your network now, where your encryption is on every point. And maybe you don't care that you don't have the strongest encryption on a segment of your network that has nothing important, but you certainly want to focus on where your very important data is and have those blocks between them. And then also, I'm always talking about cost benefit because that's what gets the C-suite's attention. If you implement higher levels of encryption now and you know where you need to move it, that will help you because end-of-life software, you're constantly refreshing your network. It will be cheaper to do that now than it is the day, Q-day, when this comes and happens and everybody's in a firestorm and all the experts are trying to, handle it and refresh the networks. And so that's something that I'm really thinking about, talking about, and I think we all need to be looking after.
Does anyone else want to comment?
Just on the comment about the encrypted file system, there's also a possibility if you have an encrypted file system via ransomware or an attack, if you can afford to maintain that in its encrypted status, there may be a chance that law enforcement will get access to an encryptor key at some point in the future. So we recommend to maintain that encrypted file system for the time being, offline.
Anybody else?
I would say as a takeaway, to me, to Mark's point, fundamentals. You do the little things right on a day-to-day basis, and you can have a better chance of securing your network. And that's things like instant response blast, it's checklist, that's looking at logs. And that can pay. We did an exam, which nobody likes an exam from a regulator, but we made recommendations to the company, and 6 months later they came back and said that they reduced their insurance premium by 70%. And there was nothing, it was basics. It was multi-factor authentication, logging, incident response plan, all those things that Brett talked about earlier today. You do that, and it actually may pay off for you.
Did you want to say anything? Okay, any questions? Kevin's kind of take us off. Oh, we got a question right here.
With the advent of real-world assets being tokenized, that kind of complicate things for you guys, make it easier because it's all encrypted by nature. Or you don't even think about that?
Tokenization is going to create certainly in the securities industry, it's going to create a lot of issues for us to think about. We've been working with the SEC and some other entities over the last couple of years and trying to think through what are the possibilities. Now that there's more definition that's coming, now we're able to kind of pivot, but it's still early as to what that exactly is going to look like.
Do we have one more question? Time for yes, sir.
Just jumping back to your tabletops exercise preparedness topic you had earlier, what are some of the most effective ways to make that case to the folks in the line of business or in the communications function that, hey, it's worth taking the time out of your day to spend it in this exercise to say that, I know you have your regular business that you're trying to do, you're trying to sell products, you're trying to push a company message, but it's worth taking the time out to be part of a cybersecurity exercise to be better prepared for when something comes up.
Money.
Yeah.
That's what the answer. And the reason why, if you Google this, and I wrote on this last year during Cybersecurity Month, but the amount of money that companies save from an incident response plan is millions of dollars. And the downtime. You by doing the tabletop exercise, you reduce the amount of time that your company is likely down as a result of a cyber attack. But that is my answer. I can't remember how many million. It was like $5 million. I can't remember the statistics, but if you Google it, you can come up with it. Does anyone else have a?
Yeah, I was going to say as well, fines, it also
Yes.
goes to money, but
Yeah.
in insurance, right? So insurance will give you a premium and a break if you do these tabletops, these incident response. Also, you'll get fines if you're in healthcare and, OCR comes looking for various regulations and issues. NIST, if you're a federal contractor, or have any of the responsibilities there are annual requirements, right, to do this testing. I think that the real question is, though, how do you make people take it seriously? I mean, I think a lot of people, like companies, know that it should be done and it needs to be done, but then the rigor of that, and I, trying to give those real world examples and talking about how emotional it can be, if your purse is stolen on the subway. Think of that. That's what's happening, and so you're gonna panic unless you practice and try and know what to do. And I think that's the other, is telling the stories and really talking about the emotional aspect and preparedness is important.
I think we're out of time, right? Okay. Well, thank you so much to our panel. I think they hopefully everybody benefited from their insight on these issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, panelists. And as we close things out, just want to do a couple of thank yous. Of course, to FBI Boston for everything they've done to support this over the years. Wanted to thank our corporate sponsors, Hinkley Allen, Blue Mantis, Haiku, the Bella Foundation, also Google Mandiant, and I give them a special shout out. They were with us well before we were even established program 11 years ago, and they've been super supportive of us over the past few years. And then finally, special shout out to Kevin Swindon. He hates this and he's in the line of sight, but he's the reason we're here now. He came up with this idea in 2016. We launched in 2017, so give Kevin a shout out, and then we'll see you soon. He hates that. And again, we have lunch back at Barrett House. We have a ton of food, so please eat up. And then special thanks to one of our other sponsors here. We have the Shields Innovation Center at Boston College High School, and we have the robotics team right here out in front. So thank you, boys. Thanks, everyone.